Today I'm going to show you my new Ableton Live 12 MIDI Transform device. It's called Step Copy. Once you've put it in your user library where your Max for Live MIDI tools go, you can find it under the Transform section here when you're in the piano roll, and you grab it from this menu here. It's basically a step sequencer, but it's a MIDI effect. And it applies that step sequence to any notes that you've highlighted. And the sequence is always relative to the note start position, etc., etc. You'll see that in a moment. What I've done is I've already got a note here. This is a scale aware device, so I'm going to turn on scale. We're in F Dorian because why not? You'll see that this step is on. That's the original note I've got, so I can turn that off. But I can make copies of it like this. So you can see how it works as a step sequencer like that already. Plus you can move the pitch around of each individual step. Because we're in scale mode, you can see it's moving to the scale. And just in case you're not sure, I've got scale mode there on. So this is just basic operation of step copy. This is all just based on that single note that we started with, which is probably how you'll want to be using it a lot of the time. I'll point out you've also got control of velocity for each individual note and duration in case you want the notes to have a different length to the original note, make them longer or shorter. You can do that with duration. If you ever want to reset any of these controls, by the way, just double click. So if I double click this, it goes back to 100, which is default. That means 100% of the original note's duration. These controls are all relative to the original note. Quick trick, if you just want to reset the sequence, just hold Shift and press Paste. And that's just a little code for clear the page. Now I'll explain what the pages are. There's 16 of them. They're really just 16 lots of 16 step sequences, but you can chain them together, which I'll show you in a moment. But for now, you can use the pages as little palettes of rhythm. So let's change rhythm here. And it's clear because none of these steps are on. So we can turn that first one on for our first step. Maybe make this one a little bit different. Maybe put some pitch shifts in there. Then if we switch back to page 1, that's the sequence we had there. But if we go back to page 2, that's the one we just set up. We can copy page 2 over to page 3. And when I hit paste, it'll just paste it in. But you might also be wondering, okay, I want sequences that go beyond just 16 steps. Well, for starters, you can move the position of each note. So the position is relative to where it is in the sequence. So this is always the first step. This is always the last step. And it keeps that in mind. So if you just subtract one, it just shifts it in place. So that means you can stack notes on top of each other and make chords with step copy. And then you could really use this as a bank of chord progressions, for example. You'd have control over a limited number of notes in those chord progressions, but you could start with more than just one single note. So we started with just a single note there. What happens if let's just clear this. Let's make a little chord. And now let's highlight that. I'll just hit transform. That just does the effect again. Now we can see how we can take chords or even sequences and apply this step sequence to it. So it's more than just a simple monophonic step sequencer. It can get very polyphonic very quickly and very easily. And let me just show you with a series of notes as well, not just a single chord. So let's once again just clear this. I'll just space these out. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Now visually, this might get a little bit confusing. So let's just actually reset it. Just reset this page. Turn on the copies. You can see that happening there. Now let's shift the pitch. Very quickly with step copy, you can take one or just a few notes and quickly turn it into a much more complex MIDI sequence. You can also use it to arrange whole songs. So let's look at the song editor. If I go into options here, currently we've been on page mode the whole time, which means that whatever gets applied to the piano roll is the current page that we're viewing. And you remember before it was updating as we were changing pages. For now, I'll put this on song mode. And that will apply page 1 followed by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. As you can tell, it's got very complicated. So let's just strip it down. Let's reset each one. We can see that's page 1, that's page 2. And just to show you that, I'll move page 2 up to 2. And to show you page 3, I'll move page 3 up to 3. So with that in mind, I guess it's not really much point having page 3 when it's off the page. But let's just go into page 2. And we can add a couple of extra steps to this. So the sequence has just got a little bit more complicated. I'm going to get rid of that page 3. It's annoying me now. Now we've got basically a 32-step sequencer. If we just want to, treat it that way. It is very familiar if you've used a step sequencer before. Some of you might be coming from FL Studio, missing the step sequencer there, and I hope this kind of helps a little bit. I could make the sequence page 1, page 2, and then page 2 and page 1. And now watch what happens when I update page 2. Does the same for both. So maybe you have a sequence that's like an A-B sequence, or in this case, A-B-B-A, ABBA. Let's hear it for ABBA. If you have that, you'll want to be able to update the A and the B and have that update across the whole piano roll. If you're looking at step copy and you're like, oh yeah, I can do those things in other ways. I think one advantage is you can tweak in real time like this in a way that is a lot quicker than having to select those individual notes. You can also chain together Ableton's other MIDI effects here, MIDI transforms, which is really what they are. For example, if I hit legato, it applies a legato to it. But what's interesting, and this is completely unintentional, I just love that this is how these tools work. This is how Ableton's designed it. If I shift notes, it still has that legato effect. It's adjusting the length of the notes. I didn't have to do that in the code. That's so nice that I didn't have to do that in the code. Thank you, Ableton. So once you get the feel for how apply cycles work, which is what this kind of whole process is called with MIDI Transform, and you'll notice I got auto on, by the way, because that's just how I like to work, and I think that's how step copy works best. But once you get the feel for apply cycles, you'll realize you can kind of do quite interesting things by switching back and forth between these controls and step copy. See if I can nudge up. Yeah, you can nudge up the pitch as well, and it stays in the scale. You can hit humanize, I noticed that. Once again, none of this is actually committing to the grid until you click to get out of it. That's how you exit the apply cycle. It's keeping that humanization, and I can remove notes, etc., etc. You know what I mean? Let's just look at a couple of other quick features you might want to know about. If you hit the dice, you've probably been looking at that dice and wondering what that is. If you hit the dice, it basically gives you a random page. And this is a sort of experimental feature. I've tried to tune it to be somewhat musical. I would say if you don't like the sequence, just click the dice again. Keep clicking the dice until you get something you like. You'll get something you like. And it's a good way just to start a sequence. Now, if you get a sequence and you want to shuffle it, like you kind of like the rough idea of the sequence, you just want to change a few things, hold shift and click dice. So this is another one of the little sneaky shift commands in here. See how it's just changing page 2 just subtly, but it's not completely changing it like when we hit the dice. Remember, we're in song mode here, so we're viewing page 1, then page 2, and page 1 again. There's another little trick with the shift button that makes arpeggios. If you hold shift and click pitch right here, it'll basically pick a random chord shape. And if you're in a scale, it'll fit it in that scale. And I believe it's relative to the original note in the scale. So it's somewhat scale aware there in a whole other way. That may be good or bad. You let me know if you like that or not. I'm not musical enough to really tell you. But if I hold shift and click this, as you can see, it'll just cycle through a bunch of different arpeggios. And it's totally random in terms of what chord and pattern it uses. So there's so many different combinations there. Once again, because it applies to whatever you've selected from the beginning, you can imagine how complex these arpeggios would get if you had a chord, for example. But you could keep it all in the scale, which is a reminder I've been in scale the whole time. You can also save the state by going into the options menu and pressing save. And then I can call this something. So like my save, very creative, hit OK. Now, because it's a MIDI file, it will appear in the browser and you can drag and drop them onto step copy. They are not actually MIDI files, which does mean you do get this funny warning as you drag them over. Or if you drag them on here, it'll say this file does not appear to be a valid MIDI file. Just ignore that. Ableton's right, but we want it anyway. This is just one I created before called Basic. It's just really basic shapes, and I think I should just put it back into Page for now. By the way, it's still in legato mode, so I think just to get out of that, let's just reset things. Cool. Now back to this, just hit transform again. So that's a basic 4 to the floor pattern. That's a double that. And then I started to just, tick boxes until it sounded good. That's really what this preset bank is. It's an encouragement for you to make your own presets. That's the way I view that. I've spent too much time putting this thing together. I really can't be bothered making presets for you. I'm sorry. Couple of other quick things I should probably show you, and all those things live in options, so I should just explain what some of these options are. First of all, you can shift the entire page with this little pitch shift button. Quite handy. So let's just look at the pitch there. Okay, try and remember what the numbers are. We go up again. I think they changed. Let's try it again. Yeah, they changed. And they seem to have changed the correct amount of times. Plus we can just see it there, it's doing its thing. Timescale basically can just make things really, really fast if you want like those blippy arpeggios. So it's pretty cool for that. Obviously, you can go macro here. So here's where if you are Eric Satie, I think that's how you say it, this mode might appeal to you. And you can also shift the position. Now, right now, it's going to shift according to the timescale. However, if we tell it to force 16ths for the position, watch what happens if we shift a note now. It'll always be in 16th notes. So that way you can work in kind of macro long-term timescales, but shift notes in a way that's in 16th steps. So you get a little bit more resolution over the patterns you're making. You might also see this select mode here. I think I'll quickly show you what that is. That's a special mode. So I think to start off, I'll just clear this page. In terms of select mode, I'm going to make the notes a little bit longer. Now when I highlight these notes, it doesn't have to be a chord for select note. Just thought it'd be cool. If I make this select, the timescale is now relative to the length of that selection. So if I turn this one on, it copies it exactly after it finishes. So that's really more of a step copy in a very literal sense. If you really just wanted to use this to duplicate things, that's a good way to do it. Now this works, speaking of macro scales, this works again on whatever scale you want. In terms of time scales, I mean, we can make it that big. And then we got select mode on and turn that on. There it is there. And we can shift that chord up, for example. This is just using one page, you know what I mean? But this can cover 8 bars. Okay, so I've gone back to a 4-bar loop. We're on page 3. And we're on loop mode. Watch what happens as we apply this. First of all, you can see that it's getting to the end of the sequence and starting it again. And if I update this, it updates on all those loops. It just loops the current page until the end of the sequence. Very simple. The bar position, or rather the bar value, is how you get out of 4/4 time signature, basically. So if I shift this down, it'll start repeating every 12 steps, and let's just check that. Yeah. So we're getting 3 beats, and then we're restarting that sequence. Watch what happens when I go over, by the way, and let me just make sure positions off. We can put those ticks up. We'd be going up to here. What happens when I do this one here? And then what happens if I shift the pitch? Ooh. So what actually happens when you change the loop length is those steps that are outside the loop, you can still turn on if you want. It's basically layering the loop over itself for the last however many steps. That's another one where I left it in because I think that way you get the best of both worlds. If you just want classic 12-step sequencer, just don't touch those ones. But if you just want the option to throw in a few extra steps on top of the start of each loop, that's there as well. So that's loop mode, that's bar mode as well. And you can see bar mode can go right down. It can also go up. So actually, you can start this on 32, for example, if you want. So if you just want it to have a little bit here and then nothing, and then a little bit here and nothing, that's one way to do it. So I've got Octave Limit on, and just watch what happens to this little individual step as it gets higher and higher. It just gets shifted back down at a certain point. It's not quite an exact octave from the original note, because I like being able to go over a little bit, but it's basically a limit to stop you from going way too far, which can happen sometimes, especially if you're starting with a sequence of notes. Like if we were starting already with something that had a bit of pitch variation like that, then we applied this to it. You can see it's creating notes even higher. So having Octave Limit on helps. And when I turn it off, you can see they're even way higher. One other thing that's probably good for you to know that I haven't shown you yet is if you just change any of these parameters on a step that's off, the step turns on, because it just assumes, okay, if you're tweaking this step, you probably want to use it. So that's just a little hint. So just getting back to the special commands in step copy when it's in song mode, currently just working with the first 2 pages just to keep things simple. If I put the letter C in, and it can be capital or lowercase, it doesn't matter. If I go C to 1 C, C stands for current page, which is whatever page you're viewing at that time. So whatever page you've had selected in the page menu will be represented in this song in the position wherever you've got C. It can be capital or lowercase, and it'll work either way. And I think once again, just to distinguish these pages a little bit, I've got to just change the pitch. Just make it a bit more different. So if you want to loop, basically if you want to audition pages in your sequence, that would be the best way to view it. So we can switch to another page here. And look, you can make many more complicated things with this. You can put tons of steps in. As you can see, it was originally loaded with pages 1 to 16. Just make sure there's a space between each symbol. If I put the letter P, that means pitch shift. I could tell it to shift the pitch of page 1 by 4 semitones. And then let's have page 1 again, just normal. Okay, so you can see how, when I said semitones, actually in this case it's scale degree. This one is 4 above that one there. And whatever I do to page 1 now, let's just do a random. This will always be 4 steps above that. So that's one way you can get creative with just a single page. And for the hell of it, let's just do page 1 again, but this time we're going to do -2. So you can do negatives as well. I should have pointed that out. And this better work. Yeah, there we go. Some other special commands in the song sequencer are for bar. So if you want page 1 to repeat, but with only a bar length of, let's say, 12 steps, you would do this. So I think actually what I should do, because we won't see it if we do it on the last one, let's just do all ones. But this second one here is going to only be 12 steps long, B12. Oops. Make sure, don't do what I just did. Make sure you put the 12 next to the B. Don't put a space. Otherwise, it will think you're talking about page 12. Hit enter to update it. Okay, so you might be thinking, why did it change over here? I was expecting this one to shift over. No, that's because what we did is we told this iteration of page 1 to only be 12 long. And that's why this stuff all shifted over, because this one ended early. Okay, think about it. Because when Ableton applies the MIDI transformation effect, if there are 2 notes of the same pitch in the same position, it'll delete one of them, because there's no point having 2 C3s at the exact same time on the exact same instrument. In this mode, by the way, remember before with the bar length, we could see it getting shortened, but still overlapping. In this mode, it doesn't overlap. I figured if you wanted this functionality, you probably actually wouldn't want the overlap. There's also L, which is layer. So I can layer page 1 with page 2. If I hit enter, that's 1 layered with 2 right there. Now let's just clear them. This one we need higher pitch. You know what we should do to really make the point is let's just make a simple sequence here of the same pitch. So we're going to make chords. I'm going to copy that, paste it on a page 2, then go here to shift it up. There we go. Hey, we can layer even more pages on top of each other. Let's layer 3 and 4. Why not? Go to 3, paste, shift, go to 4, paste, shift. And in this particular case, you can make the chords a little bit more complicated just by shifting each layer. So you're not just copying the same chord. It looks like we're just copying the same chord, but we've actually got control over each individual layer, as you might have guessed. So once again, the letters C for current page, P for pitch shift, L for layer, and B for bar or bar length. And with B and P, don't put a space when you put a number in, because the code looks for that character, B or P, and immediately looks for signs of a number right after it. Spaces are only for separating whole commands. It's just all sorts of stuff you can do with the song sequencer. I highly doubt anyone's actually going to write a whole song that way. Well, that'd be great if you did. That's great marketing for me. Kind of feel like something like this maybe should come with Ableton. Hint, hint. Give me money. And thanks for watching. I think I've really covered pretty much everything I can think of. If you've got any questions, put them below. If you've got any comments, put them below. You know where to click, like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram. Hopefully I remember to put it in the description this time. Thanks again for watching. See you later.